The sun beat down on the cracked wooden platform like it was punishing the sins of the people gathered below it. Dust swirled, kicked up by wagon wheels and boots alike. But no one seemed to mind. The whole town had turned out for the auction. Some leaned against the faded fence railings, chewing straw or whispering behind gloved hands. Others stood tall, puffed with importance, as if their judgment mattered more in the harsh frontier heat. They called it the labored auction, a term meant to soothe conscience. Orphans, widows, the desperate, the discarded. They were paraded and sold off for their own good, as if survival could be bartered like sacks of grain. When the girl was brought out, the murmurs turned sharp. She couldn't have been more than 16. Barefoot, skin darkened by sun and dust, hair hanging in 2 uneven braids. Her clothes were torn, patched in places with hide and hand-sewn cloth. But it was her eyes that silenced the noise. Dark and steady, they looked out over the crowd like she was the one doing the choosing. "Half-blood," someone muttered. The word slid through the crowd like a cold wind. "She's one of them," a woman whispered, clutching her boy's hand tighter. Her mother was Apache. No one stepped forward. Even the auctioneer faltered, clearing his throat and lifting the girl's chin with the edge of his clipboard. "Strong back," he said. "Knows how to gather, how to cook, or so I've heard." Still, silence. The girl didn't speak. Didn't lower her eyes. She simply stood, spine straight, as if the world hadn't already turned its back on her. Colt Brenner stood apart from the crowd, just off to the left of the corral. He leaned on the gatepost, dusty hat low over his brow. He hadn't intended to bid. Wasn't even sure why he'd come. Maybe curiosity. Maybe something lonelier. His land was drying up. His cattle had thinned. His wife had died 3 winters ago, and with her had gone the warmth from the house. He hadn't spoken more than 5 words to a soul in weeks, and yet something about the girl's silence spoke louder than the crowd's noise. $2, Colt said, voice low, heads turned. The auctioneer blinked. $2? That's all? "It's what I've got," Colt said, lifting his eyes. "And it's more than any of you offered." The girl looked at him then. Just a flicker, but it was enough to make Colt's chest tighten. The gavel hit the wood like a gunshot. "Sold." "To Mr. Brenner," the crowd murmured. Some with disapproval, some with relief. Colt said nothing, just tipped his hat and moved forward. The girl stepped off the platform without help, her gaze now turned away. They didn't speak as he led her to the wagon, didn't even look at each other again. The ride back to the ranch was long and quiet. The sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows that crept across the scrubland. Colt stole a few glances. The girl sat rigid on the opposite side of the wagon bed, eyes locked on the horizon. She hadn't asked his name, nor had he offered it. She hadn't thanked him either, but then, he hadn't earned it. When they reached the house, Colt gestured to the small side cabin, once used for extra hands during roundup season. "You can stay there," he said. "It's clean. Roof doesn't leak." She nodded once and stepped down, not waiting for help. Colt watched her walk to the cabin. The way she moved, light, balanced, reminded him of the wild deer that wandered near the canyon. Careful, untouchable. He didn't expect gratitude. He didn't expect conversation. But that night, as he sat by the hearth with his boots off and a pot of beans going cold, he found himself wondering what her voice might sound like. Whether she dreamed in English or Apache, and outside, under a sky full of stars she'd likely named in another tongue, the girl who had been bought for $2 stared at the unfamiliar land, memorizing it like it was her own. Because one day, it would be. The girl didn't speak for 3 days. She woke before the rooster, moving barefoot through the ranch yard like part of the morning mist. She carried water, split wood, and cleaned the tools without being asked. By the time Colt pulled on his boots and stepped outside, he'd find chores done and the fire already going in the cookhouse stove. He didn't ask how she knew what needed doing. She just did. At first, Colt told himself he was keeping an eye on her. It was practical, even necessary. But after a week, he stopped pretending. He wasn't watching out of caution. He was watching because he couldn't help it. She had a way of moving across the dry ground like it wasn't dry at all. Once, he saw her kneel beside a cracked arroyo, press her palm to the dirt, and smile. That evening, clouds rolled in from the south, and a soft rain fell. Not much, just enough to settle the dust, but enough to make Colt wonder. Another morning, he found her staring into the barn rafters. A rattler had coiled itself in the corner, blending into the dark wood. Before he could shout a warning, she raised her hand to silence him and reached slowly for a rake. With one clean motion, she flicked the snake down and out the door, its tail rattling uselessly against the ground. She said nothing, just picked up the feed sack and kept walking. Colt had spent most of his life on this land. 42 years of digging wells, fixing fences, reading the sky. But lately, the sky hadn't listened. The land had gone quiet. Now it was whispering again. He found himself watching her when she thought no one was looking, when she paused to smell the wind or crouched low to study a patch of grass that shouldn't be growing there. He caught her once humming low to herself as she walked the fence line, a tune he didn't know, sung in no language he recognized. And he realized something strange. He was no longer listening to the wind. He was listening through her. One evening, Colt sat sharpening a blade on the porch as the sun dipped low. Nita emerged from the shadows of the stable and approached. She didn't say a word, just knelt in the dirt at his feet and began to draw. He watched as her fingers etched a winding path through the dust, past the barn, behind the paddocks, through a stretch of land he'd always called dead ground. She made circles, symbols, curves that mimicked the way water ran when it had somewhere to go. "What's that?" Colt asked, voice soft. Nita didn't look up. "Where the river used to be," she said. It was the first time he'd heard her voice. He blinked. "River?" She nodded. "Before the men built their fences, before the wells cut it off, it still runs. Deep, quiet." Colt looked at the line she'd drawn, then toward the horizon. That stretch of land had been dry and cracked for years. He'd dug a well near the East Ridge a few seasons back. Nothing but dust and regret. "You sure?" he asked. Nita finally looked up at him. Her eyes were calm. "You dig with your hands," she said. "I dig with my ears." That night, Colt couldn't sleep. He sat in the dim light of the cabin, running his thumb over the handle of his wife's old kettle. It hadn't been used much since she passed. Her rocking chair still sat in the corner, threadbare shawl draped across the back like she might return at any moment. He remembered the way she'd laugh when storms rolled in, how she'd say the sky was singing to her. Colt never believed in that sort of thing. He believed in weather charts and planting calendars, but the land hadn't listened to calendars in a long time. He rose before dawn and found Nita already at the fence line, holding a stick and watching the sky. They stood in silence until she spoke again. "Storm's coming," she said, glancing at the birds circling low. Colt looked up. "Sky's clear." She shook her head. "You're looking too high." That day he brought her a map, his old one, hand-drawn with notes from 30 years of riding the land. She took it, studied it quietly, then turned it sideways. "It's wrong," she said simply. He didn't argue. That night, she sat by the fire and pointed to the stars. "Two, yeah," she said, tapping one. "The coyote." Colt leaned back in his chair. "And that one?" She hesitated, then said, "Chagi. Grandmother. She watches the night." Colt nodded. "You know 'em all, huh?" She gave the smallest smile. "Not all. Just the ones who listen." He watched her in the firelight, her features softened by the glow, her eyes reflecting the sky. She wasn't just surviving this land. She belonged to it in a way he never had. Not even after all his years. And he began to wonder if maybe he hadn't saved her at that auction. Maybe she was saving him. The summer deepened, and Colt stopped asking where Nita went. She'd take a canteen, a bundle of jerky, and a cloth bag, then vanish past the ridge like smoke on the wind. Sometimes, she returned with wild herbs or river stones, sometimes with nothing but a breeze tangled in her braids. But every time she came back changed. Calmer, more rooted, like the land itself had whispered something sacred into her bones. Colt watched from a distance. He didn't question her paths anymore. Not after the day she'd led him to water, in a dry canyon where even coyotes feared to tread. He gave her freedom because he understood now. She wasn't wandering, she was remembering. Some mornings, he found strange markings in the dirt near the barn. Arrows, spirals, claw-like etchings. Once, she caught him staring and said quietly, "Trail signs. My mother taught me. They mark what the land forgets." They began riding together once or twice a week. Colt would saddle up Dusty, and Nita would walk her own horse. An old Mustang she'd coaxed into trust with nothing but song. No bridle, no bit. Just soft words and the kind of patience that took generations to learn. One ride took them farther, west than Colt had been in years. They followed a deer trail into a box canyon, thick with cottonwood and shade. Nita dismounted first and led him through a narrow pass. On the other side, Colt froze. Wild horses, at least 20. A mix of paints, bays, and dappled gray. They drank from a stream that shimmered beneath the rocks, water so clear it looked like the sky had fallen there and shattered. "They come here every summer," Nita said, crouching low, her voice barely a breath. "My mother called this place Soon, the root that drinks." Colt removed his hat and stared. "How'd you know this was here?" She didn't answer at first. Then, "Because it knew me." He looked at her then. Not as a worker, not as a burden, not even as a mystery, but as something necessary. A bridge between the ranch he thought was dying and the life it had been waiting to remember. For the first time in years, he smiled, and meant it. The town, of course, had its own memory, a bitter one. Word got out. A neighbor spotted Colt and Nita riding near the South Creek and spread tales at the saloon. Whispers turned sharp, and before the week was out, the sheriff came. Up the road, hat low, badge glinting like judgment in the sun. Colt met him at the gate. "She's been seen wandering," the sheriff said. "Onto other folks' land." Colt didn't flinch. "She's mapped every inch of this country better than you ever did. If she's crossed a fence, it's only because some fool put it in the wrong place." The sheriff sighed, scratched his jaw. "I'm not here to fight you, Brenner, but folks are nervous. You know what they say about her kind." Colt's voice dropped low. "What kind is that?" The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "She's Apache on her mother's side. Folks remember what happened a few winters back. They don't like the idea of a girl knowing more than them," Colt snapped. "Of someone brown-skinned teaching 'em how to live right." The sheriff's mouth opened, then closed. "Just be careful is all. Don't get too close to her." "I'm already close," Colt said, stepping forward. "Closer than you'll ever understand. So unless you've got something real to say, get off my land." The sheriff left with dust on his boots and shame in his silence. That night, Colt found Nita sitting by the fire pit, knees drawn to her chest, staring at the flames. She didn't look up as he approached. "They think I don't belong here," she said softly. He sat beside her. "That's because they never belonged to it." She turned to him, eyes heavy with questions too old for her face. "Why do you let me stay?" Colt was quiet for a long time. The fire cracked, and the night wrapped around them like a blanket, stitched from stars. "When my wife died," he said, "the land went silent. I thought it was grief. I stopped listening." He glanced over, the lines in his face deepening. "You made it speak again." Nita blinked slowly. "I didn't do anything. You breathed," he said. "You walked its bones, and you sang it back to life." A long pause. Then Colt looked straight at her and said without thinking, "You're like a daughter to me, you know that?" Nita didn't move, but her lips parted slightly. Her eyes blinked once, slow and unsure, like she hadn't heard those words in any tongue before. "Good night, Pa," she whispered. Colt swallowed the lump in his throat. "Good night, Nita." And for the first time since the auction, she smiled. The smoke came at dawn. Colt woke to the stench of it, bitter, heavy, unnatural. It wasn't the kind that rose from a morning cook fire or a distant lightning strike. This smoke clung to the skin. It whispered of hatred. He ran outside barefoot, shirt half-buttoned, shotgun slung behind him. The barn was already half gone. Flames danced through the slats like devils let loose, devouring hay and old timber. The horses had scattered. He could hear the terrified whinny of Dusty from the paddock gate. Nita was nowhere in sight. Neighbors arrived late. Too late. Buckets passed from hand to hand, but the wind was too cruel, the fire too stubborn. It burned hot, fast, angry. By mid-morning, only the stone foundation remained. Colt stood in the ash, hands blackened, heart thudding. He turned as the sheriff rode in with a grim look and familiar company. Dean Harrow, the son of a nearby rancher. The boy wouldn't meet Colt's eyes. "Say it," Colt snapped. Dean stepped forward. It was her, the half-blood girl. She cursed our cattle. 2 calves dead in 3 days. I saw her near our fence line last week. Then last night. He trailed off, guilt flickering across his face like shadows from the blaze. Colt's jaw clenched. "So you lit my barn?" Dean looked away. "It was to scare her off. You could have killed someone." "She ain't someone," Dean muttered. "She's not like us." That was when Colt stepped forward. His voice was a growl now. "She's better than you. Smarter than any man I've met. She saved this land more times than you've spit on it. And you, boy, you're gonna regret this." But Nita was already gone. She'd taken nothing but her blanket and her old trail pouch. Colt followed her tracks through the canyon, his breath shallow, eyes straining across the horizon. He found her near dusk, standing at the edge of a cliff she'd once led him to, where the wind moved in strange patterns, where the rocks sang if you sat quietly enough. She didn't turn as he approached. "I knew they'd come," she said, her voice flat. "They always do. The moment something grows, someone wants to burn it down." Colt's voice was hoarse. "Why'd you run?" She turned now. Her face was streaked with dirt and ash, but her eyes were dry. "Because I thought maybe you'd start listening to them too." He stepped closer. "I didn't come to make you stay for the work, or the chores. I came because this place is empty without you." She gave a small shake of her head. "You saw dirt," she whispered. "But I saw roots," Colt swallowed. "And I was blind." She looked at him then, really looked. And for a long moment, neither spoke. "I don't want to be bought," she said finally. "Or owned. Or thanked. I just want to belong." "You already do," Colt said. "I just didn't say it fast enough." The silence around them was deep, like the land itself was listening. "I'm not asking you to come back as a worker," Colt added. "I'm asking you to come back as my family." Her lip quivered slightly, but she nodded. Once. The next week, they dug a new well. Colt followed her markings, her lines in the dirt. She showed him how the birds flew lower in one area, how the grasses stayed greener even after heat waves. They dug through stone and clay for 4 days. On the 5th, the water came. It wasn't a trickle. It was a pulse, a heartbeat from deep in the ground. Colt dipped his hands in it and wept. "This land wasn't dying," he said softly. "It was waiting." Nita stood barefoot in the mud, face tilted to the sky, eyes closed. He stepped beside her. "You're not just from the land," he murmured. "You are the land." She smiled without opening her eyes. They rebuilt the barn slowly. Not grand, not the way it used to be, but stronger, lined with cedar posts and stone. The neighbors kept their distance, and Colt didn't mind. He no longer needed their approval. He had what they didn't: truth in his soil and fire in his air. One evening, he left a paper on the table. His will. He'd changed it. Everything he owned, the ranch, the land, the livestock, was hers. She saw it, didn't say anything, just left a pressed sage leaf on top of it the next morning. He understood. The final image was this: Nita, riding bareback through the canyon at dusk. The wind tangled in her hair, her silhouette painted against the red sky. She rode like she'd never been broken, never been bought. like the land itself had lifted her from its dust and said, "Go, be seen." She was no longer the girl no one would touch. She was the one the earth remembered. And this time, it would never forget her.